Hey, it's Natalie Callback, and I'm today here with Mary Fan. I'm super excited to see Mary. This is actually the first time we see each other. We have not met in person yet, but she was recommended to me by a mutual friend. And Mary Fan is a sci-fi writer, fantasy writer. She's also from Jersey City. And she is the author of the Jane Called sci-fi series, Red Adapt Publishing, and the Star-Swept, YA sci-fi series, and the Flynn Nightsider. What is YA?
YA stands for young adult, and that's books aimed at a teenage audience.
Okay, thank you. So, dark fantasy series, and Stronger Than the Bronx Dragon, and another young adult steampunk fantasy. And in addition, she's also co-editor of the Brave New Girls young adult sci-fi anthologies, which feature tales about girls in STEM. Revenues from sales are donated to the Society of Women Engineers Scholarship Fund. That's amazing. So I feel stupid because I'm reading this. This is the first time I'm introducing someone by reading everything, because I was like, I'm gonna mess up the titles, and she has written so many amazing books, but also the whole lingo in English, from the sci-fi world is like so different for me. I'm like, oh my God, I'm messing this up. So, but I want to hear a little bit more about your books and what you're writing, and you can do that way better than I can.
Sure, yeah, and sorry about the whole acronym thing. I guess, when you've been in like the book world so long, you just forget that these things are acronyms. Like, oh yeah, YA, everyone knows what that is. But so yeah, most of the stuff I write is YA or young adult, which means it's aimed at a teenage audience. What that's meant over the years has evolved, but in like contemporary publishing, it tends to mean books about high schoolers for high schoolers. Now, they don't necessarily have to be in a physical high school. Oftentimes they're in, spaceships or, magical fantasy kingdoms. But essentially, the characters are between the ages of about 15 and like 18, 19. And yeah, I write mostly science fiction and fantasy books that takes place like in outer space or in, faraway fairy tale lands. And most of them are aimed at a young adult audience and like star teenage characters. And as for why this is, the sci-fi fantasy part just came out of what I was always interested in. Ever since I was a kid, I always just liked the books that were about magic, that were about outer space or, faraway planets. I wasn't too interested in the stuff that took place on Earth because, well, frankly, I was like, I live on Earth. I don't need to read about it. That said, there is a lot of really great contemporary stuff out there, so I don't mean to knock it. Just that's not where my interests lie. So yeah, I always gravitated towards science fiction and fantasy. And then when I started writing, I was pretty young myself. The first time I wrote like a full length book, I was like 12. That book has been buried and should be forgotten. But the first time I published a book, I was still pretty young. I think I was 23 when I wrote it and 25 when it came out.
Wow.
And so the characters were also very young because that was just my perspective. And I guess I just kind of fell into a groove where like that's the space. So even as I've gotten older, my characters haven't, because I'm just accustomed to that space now.
Do you feel, that is a deep question in the beginning, but do you feel that as you're getting older, that you, how do you keep touch with the age group you're writing for?
The nice thing about writing sci-fi and fantasy is that you don't have to keep up with, youth trends as much. Like I'm not writing about, TikTok, whatever that is. When you're talking sci-fi and fantasy, there's certain coming of age themes that are pretty universal. It's the first time you kind of start to feel like an adult, but you're still a kid. There's a lot of like, I tend to write a lot of romance into my books, and they tend to be, first loves, first crushes, because that's that age. Like, you're experiencing the world almost as an adult for the first time, but you still have that, sort of childlike wonder, childlike naivete and idealism. And yeah, I guess, like I said, that's the sort of the space I write in. That's kind of like the mindset I write in. So even as I've gotten older, like I'm able to bring myself back to like these sort of universal coming of age experiences, which, are the same whether, you're reading something written 100 years ago versus something written nowadays. I mean, of course, there is a lot that's changed in terms of, attitudes toward like, for example, female independence. I tend to write a lot of female heroines. But I don't know, there's just something about, that age, like when you're on the cusp of adulthood that, even as I've grown older, I still remember what it was like.
No, I
And
agree. That is a
yeah, like
fair
read a
point.
lot.
Yeah, I think we all remember these times and how
Yeah.
hard it is, and it doesn't get better actually.
I know. I just remember being like, what a scam when I finally got to adulthood. It was like, I thought you were supposed to like grow up and everything gets figured out, but what a scam. It's not true.
Yeah, yeah, it totally is, and I apparently it stays like that forever. Go
Yeah.
figure, right? Do you remember like the first book that you read, sci-fi book or fantasy book that you read that was like, this is so cool and I want to write something like this?
I do actually, because it comes down to a specific book when I really think back on it. So when I was a kid, I loved the old Wishbone TV series about the little dog who would read classic books. And because I love the TV show, I also like to read the tie-in books. And sometimes in the tie-in books they would feature novels that they hadn't on the TV show. And one of these novels was a very old science fiction novel by Jack Williamson called Legion of Space.
Hmm.
So I put the Wishbone version and I was like, oh, this is a fun like space story. I want to go find the real version now. And I went to the library, I checked it out, and I read the whole thing cover to cover and was like, this is awesome. I want to write like this. And that's why I started writing sci-fi.
So, Mary, how did your usual day look like before COVID-19?
So I have a full-time job in Manhattan, and I of course live in Jersey City. So a typical day for me would involve commuting on that horrible, horrible transit system. Spending, my 9 to 5, usually more like 9 to 6, in the office, blah de blah. And then after work, I'd usually have some kind of like activity. Like my three main hobbies before everything got shut down were I was in a choir. We were supposed to do Carmen, and now we don't get to, and I'm very sad about that. I also do kickboxing at the local CKO kickboxing, which I'm sure a lot of Jersey Cityites are familiar with. It's wonderful. And I also did circus arts, flying trapeze and aerial silks.
Wow.
Yep. All that has gone away now, though. I'm so sad. And then after I finish with my evening activity, I get home. And I'm a night owl, so I normally don't go to bed until, like, if I go to bed at midnight, I consider it going to bed early. And so usually by the time I'm done with all this, I've eaten dinner, showered, blah, 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 it's like 9, 10 o'clock, and I'm like, oh, I still got 2 or 3 hours. I'm going to write.
That's amazing. And then you do.
Yes. Well, most of the time.
So now are you still working? Are you now working from home, or did that
Yes,
change?
working from home. Yeah, luckily I had one of those, office jobs that can be done just as effectively from, a laptop as like in a physical office.
So how did that change just from your time for writing? How did that change for you now working from home? Do you feel you have more time to write?
I will confess, before all this happened, I was starting to get a little overwhelmed with just so much, all my commitments. And I was actually wishing, oh my God, I wish some stuff would get canceled. Well, my wish came true. I am sorry, world. I am so sorry.
Thanks, Mary.
But then, like, once everything got canceled, like the commute went away, the activities went away, and I had all this time on my hands, I was not as productive as I thought I would be. Like, I thought, oh, now that I have 6 hours in the evening, I'm going to spend 6 hours writing. It's like, no, it turns out I only have 2 or 3 hours worth of brain power to work with. Like, whether that means, it starts at 10 p.m. or it starts earlier. Like, and I was kind of bummed about that because I was like behind on a lot of projects. And I was like, okay, at the very least I can catch up now, but I can't. It's not even a matter of time. Like my day job does sometimes bleed into my, free time, but all in all, it hasn't been that bad. And I'm like, yeah, really, the only person I can blame is me at this point.
I think though, do you think that this is like a sort of headspace that's taken and you're just like, you can't do more in this time? Or do you feel more, there's only so much creativity that can be, that like, I feel the way, for example, when I paint, like I want to paint more and longer, but I feel the same way that I cannot, sometimes I wish I could do 8 hours a day and just paint, and I shift my work around, which I can do, my other work, then teaching, etc. And I shift it and I say, okay, tomorrow I'm going to do 8 hours just painting, but I actually cannot paint 8 hours. It's the same, but I think it's just because there's only so much in me. This is it. This is what I can do. I don't know how to say it. How do you feel about that?
I agree. And it is very hard to explain because, when you are overwhelmed and too busy, you keep thinking, oh yeah, if I only had a whole week, you always dream, every writer dreams about the cabin in the woods. I go off into a cabin in the woods. There's nothing to distract me. I do nothing but write for a whole week. But even if you were given that situation, I mean, other writers might feel differently, but me personally, I'm I think I just, like you said, I just don't have that in me. I think I've been calling it creative energy recently, which sounds very woo-woo, but it's really the best way I can describe it, where it's I'm creatively tired, even though I'm not physically tired.
Yes.
If you told me to go outside and walk around the block 20 times, I'm sure, I've got plenty of physical energy. You tell me to sit down and write for an hour, I'm not happening.
So you still said 10 p.m. or whatever, do you change your times? When you write, are you no, not going to happen. I know I have to write it in the evening. I can't shift it around to be writing before work or.
Yeah, I mean, I'm still a night owl. And I remember the first few weeks of quarantine, I was kind of surprised by just how much time I was able to fritter away waiting for my usual time, to write. I would log off at 5:30, and that's 4.5 hours to kill in between, right? I thought, why don't I just start writing right now? And I'd be I can't. I need to go clean the dishes. I can't. I need to go grocery shopping. I can't. I'm going to go read the news for 2 hours. And next thing I know, it's 10 p.m. Okay, now I can write. So yeah, I think my brain has just decided we write at 10 p.m. no matter what else is going on.
But it might be also that you need that process in between so that things can settle down and your mind is not so preoccupied with the stuff that you're usually doing. And also you're probably percolating some ideas and thoughts already in your brain.
Yeah, I definitely think there's something to that. I also think it's that I'm very much a procrastinator. I am terrified of a blank page. And so I'm if I can put off facing that blank page, I will. And then usually it's around, for some reason to me, 10 p.m. just feels oh God, it's late night. If we're not going to do it now, we're never going to get it done. And until that, that fear kicks in, I'm more afraid of not getting it done than I'm afraid of the blank page. It's I can't start.
So did you start with what you're writing right now during the pandemic? Is that something that you had started before and now you're finishing it? Or did you think of a new story? Or does this time right now, do you feel there is some sort of influence in what you're writing?
So I did pick up something I'd started before the pandemic. So I started writing the third book of my latest series back in November for National Novel Writing Month. And I wrote the first 50,000 words knowing that it was only going to be about half the book. And I kept thinking, okay, I'll write the second half in January. Okay, I'll write the second half in February, et cetera, until next thing you know, it's and it's April. Well, I guess I have time to write that second half now. And so that's what I was been working on, I guess, since quarantine, mostly writing that. I finished it, but still needs some editing and stuff. And I have noticed it's gotten really bleak. And I don't know how much of that is. So it is a dystopia. So it was always going to be bleak. But I am wondering how much is it needed to be bleak because that's just the way the book was always going. And how much is it that I feel bleak. And so I'm making it even bleaker than it would have been otherwise.
Do you feel that this is really hard to write about at this time because it is already bleak and daunting what's happening? And so then going, also in your writing into that might be harder?
I actually found it kind of cathartic because I think in real life, I'm just not very good about expressing negative emotions. I always want to be the one who has a funny story or a funky anecdote. I never want to be the one who walks in and is oh my God, guys, I've had such a bad day. And I think that's just a personality thing. I know my friends are great, and if I did come in sad, they wouldn't blame me. I just don't like to be that person. But when I write, I can release that. I can be sadder on the page than I can be in real life. And so I think that's part of why it turned out bleak. It was part of me just me processing my emotions through fiction, through my character. And so yeah, that's why like it was, I think, easier to write than it would have been otherwise.
You're kind of probably living a lot of those like feelings and thoughts that then somehow take part in that story, I guess. Or it's easier to kind of, I mean, I don't know, to
Yeah,
know what the person, like, it's authentic probably, right?
I guess so. I mean, I'm sure, if I ever become famous years from now, some scholar can psychoanalyze it, but I do think I tend to like sort of channel my emotions through my character. And even if my character isn't experiencing the exact same emotion, it's somehow a reflection of it.
So you're not doing all these activities that you have been doing before and that seem to be kind of maybe also making you ready for writing. Is there something that you do, that you have like a ritual that you get ready for your writing session, or a journal or whatever, like lighting a candle? I don't know.
I guess I have been trying to like do as many, I guess, Zoom versions of what I used to do as possible, because I do find like physical activity forces you to turn your brain off. Like, if your instructor is yelling at you through a camera to do those darn push-ups, then you're going to do those darn push-ups and not be like, huh, what if my character did X? And I think just that ability to like just turn off my brain for like an hour here and there is definitely helpful. So yeah, I guess that's the closest I have. Other than that, it's just mostly just faffing around until that magical 10 p.m. hour strikes. I guess, like, time-wise, I have plenty of it. I guess I do sometimes struggle with motivation because, I mean, I tie a lot of my self-published releases to events, like sci-fi and fantasy conventions I speak at, because that way I give myself a deadline, like this event is coming whether I like it or not, so I better get things done. And of course, now all those events have gone away, so it can be hard to just motivate myself to keep to, like, a timetable. I mean, there's not really any need to, but at the same time, I feel adrift if I don't have a schedule. So that's been a struggle right there. Yeah, I guess in terms of how much my output is, it's about the same, I feel like, as pre-pandemic. I'm not like, Shakespeare writing King Lear during the plague, but I'm not also one of those people who, I've heard a lot of people are having a lot of difficulties just, just not being distracted and depressed. And fortunately for me, that's not really been the case. Like, I've been somewhat distracted and depressed, but not enough to actually, like, put my work at a standstill. So, I don't know. I feel like everything just feels weird.
Have you thought about another way to connect with your readership now that these events are not happening?
Not particularly. Just a couple of events became virtual events, so it's like, okay, I'll do a Zoom panel or something. But I guess the thing about being a writer is that it's already a pretty isolated process. So, even pre-pandemic, it's not like, I was inviting people to come and watch me write, and I wouldn't want that. And so, yeah, it's always just been like, you write the book, you put it out there in the world, and most of my promotion was either through social media or through in-person, like, events, mostly sci-fi fantasy conventions. And unfortunately, you just can't replace a convention with anything online. Like, it's just not the same. And a lot of cons have tried, and I feel like the attendees are making like a merry effort to try to like be like, oh yeah, even though we can't all meet in a hotel dressed in costume, we can still put on our costumes and turn on our webcams, but it's not the same.
Oh, you kid is so
Yeah, he's like, oh, this might get my good angle.
So where can people find you, if they want to know more about you and also about your books? Let us know. You have a website or Instagram, etc.
Yeah, the easiest place to start would be my website, which is simply www.maryfan.com. And from there, there's links to, my social media pages. Like, I'm on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter.
That was so much fun to talk to you, Mary. I hope I didn't butcher like all of the lingo. I'm now I think I'm gonna start with the Stronger Than a Bronx Dragon.
Hey!
And I'm gonna buy it now, and I can't wait to read it.
Oh, thank you so much.
So thank you so much, and yeah, see you soon, Mary. Hopefully in person. Bye.
Yeah. Bye.